And while the U.S. considers action in Syria in the wake of evidence suggesting the use of chemical weapons, a startling new revelation from Foreign Policy magazine shows that the U.S. played a role in helping Saddam Hussein use, get this, sarin gas to defeat Iranian troops back in 1988. Here's how. According to declassified CIA documents that were discovered at the National Archives using satellite images, U.S. intelligence officials conveyed the location of Iranian troops to Iraq, fully aware that Hussein's military would attack with chemical weapons, including sarin, a lethal nerve agent. And it gets worse. According to those same declassified CIA documents, senior U.S. officials were being regularly informed about the scale of the nerve gas attacks. They are tantamount to an official American admission of complicity in some of the most gruesome chemical weapons attacks ever launched. Here to talk about this bombshell revelation is Ray McGovern. He's a former CIA analyst. Ray, thank you so much for coming in. Put this into some historical context for us. What does this revelation mean?
Well, the old saw about giving hypocrisy a bad name has been overused for very good reason recently. But what we have here is a situation where the United States government enabled Iraq almost to conquer Iran by providing Iraq with satellite photography and turning a blind eye to its use of chemical weapons, including sarin gas. What happened here is that Iran was about to win the war, and the satellite photography showed that there was a hole in the Iraqi lines. And so we told the Iraqis where the hole was, what the Iranians were preparing to do, enter sarin gas, and tens of thousands of Iranian troops were killed. Now, in the broader context, if I were an Iranian, and I just heard that the duly elected government in 53 had been deposed by the CIA in 53, and then I saw in 87 that we Iranians were just about to win the war when this happened, you know, I would feel really, really strongly that we have real grievances against the United States. And the reason I mention that now is because we have a new government in Iran, and it's going to be very hard for them to tamp down this hatred, you know, this resentment, when you have the Revolutionary Guards and all those other people saying, how can you trust the Americans? You know, in 53, they overthrew our government. In 87, they prevented us from winning the war against Iraq. How can you trust them? So it's going to really require some flexibility that we haven't not seen yet on the part of Washington to work out an agreement with Iran.
No, it's hard to have this conversation without bringing up the Iraq War. A huge reason that the U.S. gave for going into the Iraq War was the fact that Saddam Hussein had used sarin gas on the Kurds. So how does this argument complicate this narrative, the fact that the U.S. might have in fact been supporting Saddam Hussein as he was using these chemical weapons, or at the very least turning a blind eye?
Well, we had the famous picture of Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. Yep. That happened the day after the first public announcement that the Iraqis had used mustard gas against the Iranians, okay? So, blind eye, well, yeah, in spades. The rest of the problem really is that we knew what was going on, and you know, there's a Geneva Convention against the use of chemical warfare. Our top leaders knew it. You know, I go through all this. I know these people, you know, yeah. And you know, question is, you know, had they no conscience? Had they no shame? Had they whistleblowing comes into play here? Why did none of these people? I'm not talking about Casey, the head of the CIA, or Gates, who is deputy, who is supervising all this. I'm talking about people who knew on the ground, people who could have said, hey, you know, I'm against chemical warfare. You're not only not doing anything about it, but you're aiding and abetting it. I'm going to go to the New York Times, which in those days was wouldn't check with the government before they published something.
It's very interesting, and the most surprising part of all of this is that these documents are obviously declassified, and they were just sitting in these archives in Maryland. So it just brings up the question, what else could be in those archives that we just don't know about? Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, thank you so much for coming in.
Most welcome.